Perhaps you've heard a story about a high school girl with a seemingly perfect life and enviable status. From the outside, she seemed to have everything anyone could want: a wealthy family, striking beauty, and popularity that surrounded her like a bright halo. But hidden beneath this glamorous facade was a different person, one who often used biting words and hurtful actions to make others feel small. She would scoff, sneer, and ridicule those she deemed less fortunate, reinforcing her own sense of control and superiority. In the end, this girl had to face the consequences of her actions. People believed justice had finally been served, that she had paid the price for the pain she'd inflicted on others. But if we look closer, could there be something we've missed? Could it be that this girl behaved as she did not merely out of choice, but because of deep, invisible wounds that no one else could see? The girl's name is Sofia. This is the part of her story that's never been told, the journey from a place of pain and missteps to one of self-discovery and transformation. At school, Sofia sat alone on a stone bench by the courtyard. Her gaze drifted across the students gathered in clusters, laughing, talking, living in a world that now seemed distant from her. Once, she'd been in the center of it all. Now her isolation was as solid as the bench beneath her. Yet her face betrayed nothing. Her expression remained a carefully crafted mask of pride and indifference. In the distance, a quiet girl watched her, a girl who knew the sting of Sofia's sharp words. This girl wondered why someone who seemed to have everything could still look so alone. Sofia sat on the cold stone bench, her back straight, shoulders pulled back, her face as calm as glass. Around her, groups of students moved in laughter and conversation, almost as if she didn't exist. She remembered how easily she used to walk among them, admired, feared, even envied. But now, wherever she looked, faces turned quickly away, voices dropped to whispers, and her former friends drifted away from her orbit, leaving her alone in a space filled only with silence. But Sofia wouldn't allow herself to show hurt. The calm on her face was a mask she'd practiced wearing for years. Her gaze stayed steady, her head high, eyes avoiding any chance of meeting someone else's. She'd learned long ago that showing even a hint of weakness or vulnerability would only invite more pain. In the shade across the courtyard, a girl stood watching her. This girl, whose clothes were simple and whose voice was quiet, had been one of Sofia's recent targets. Shy, small, and gentle, the girl had been an easy mark, a reminder of how much control Sofia thought she had over her world. Sofia had mocked her for her looks, her old shoes, even her shy smile. But here, from her place by the courtyard, the girl could see what others couldn't, or chose not to see. She could see the emptiness in Sofia's gaze. The girl's heart felt heavy. There was a question she couldn't shake. How could someone who had everything still seem so alone? The weight of Sofia's solitude settled heavily as she sat in silence, memories tugging her back to the rooms of her grand home, where tall, ornate walls were lined with reminders of everything she was expected to be. Family portraits and award plaques loomed over her, capturing faces and moments that she could never quite live up to. They watched her constantly, demanding something she didn't know how to give. Sofia wasn't her parents' first child. She wasn't even their own child. She'd been adopted years ago, taken in to fill the space left by their lost daughter, a girl they'd described as brilliant, beautiful, and loved by everyone who met her. Sofia's parents had never hesitated to remind her that she too was expected to uphold that legacy, to be a perfect replacement. With each failure, she would feel their quiet disappointment, an unspoken reminder that she wasn't enough. "You'll understand someday," her mother would say. "When you're older, you'll see why it's important." Her father's remarks, although brief, cut even deeper. "We just want you to try harder." Sofia learned to hide her fear, her insecurities, and especially the gnawing feeling that no matter what she did, she would always fall short. In time, the only way she could bear it was to wear a mask, to turn her pain into something that felt like control. She pushed others away before they could see the real her, before they could reach the vulnerable places she'd buried so deeply inside. To her classmates, she was sharp, quick with words that stung and glances that cut. It was easier to make others feel small than to face her own fragile self. In the quiet of her memories, Sofia recalled the moments when she'd first learned to put on that mask. She was younger, unsure of herself, desperate to be accepted by a family that always seemed just out of reach. Each time she failed, each forgotten test answer, each imperfect report card, she watched her mother's disappointed eyes harden, her father's silence become more distant. The praise they offered to the memory of their lost daughter seemed to make her own presence in the family feel smaller and smaller. So Sofia learned to keep her guard up, to bury her true self beneath layers of indifference and perfection. When she entered high school, she realized that the sharper her words, the stronger her presence seemed to become. The more people feared her, the safer she felt. Every snide remark or cruel comment became a way to protect herself, to remind others, and maybe herself, that she was untouchable. But alone on that bench in the school courtyard, with no admiring glances or friends circling around her, Sofia felt the weight of it all. The shield she'd spent years building felt heavier than ever, isolating her from everyone and everything. Across the courtyard, the girl who'd once been on the receiving end of Sofia's coldness still watched. To Sofia, she was just another face she could barely remember. Another classmate who'd faded into the background. But to this girl, Sofia was more than that. She was a mystery, a person surrounded by walls so high that no one ever dared to look behind them. The thought of home lingered heavily in Sofia's mind, like an invisible chain pulling her back into memories she wished she could forget. She remembered the nights sitting alone in her room, the silence of the house pressing down on her as she stared at her textbooks, her mother's words echoing in her mind. "You're capable of so much more. We gave you a life that others would dream of. Don't waste it." And then there were the times her parents spoke of her sister, the child she could never truly replace. Their stories were filled with a warmth they never showed her. She knew they wanted her to be proud, to live up to the legacy of someone they could only remember as perfect, as irreplaceable. But instead, Sofia felt like a shadow, an imitation trying to fit into a mold that was never made for her. So she created her own armor. If she couldn't be perfect in their eyes, she would become untouchable in everyone else's. She would build walls, sharpen her words, and make her presence known. At school, her biting words and cold stares created the distance she thought she needed. If they feared her, they wouldn't see the cracks beneath her surface. They wouldn't see how deeply she longed to be accepted, even loved, for who she truly was. But today, sitting alone on that bench, Sofia felt the weight of that armor suffocating her. Her gaze wandered over the courtyard, and in an unguarded moment, her eyes met those of the quiet girl watching her from a distance. The girl's expression was one of quiet curiosity, even sympathy, an expression Sofia couldn't understand. It was as if this girl saw through her, past the mask she wore, and recognized something fragile and hidden. Sofia's breath caught. For a second, she wanted to look away, but her gaze held, caught in a strange, silent exchange. In that small, fleeting moment, Sofia felt a glimmer of something she couldn't name, a feeling so foreign and yet so deeply needed that she felt it like a jolt in her chest. And then, just as quickly she looked down, letting her guard slip back into place. The bell echoed through the halls, signaling the start of the next period. Sofia rose from the bench, her mask back in place, and made her way to class, carefully ignoring the curious glances from classmates who still whispered in her wake. She walked past groups of students, clustered in doorways, and ignored the faint giggles and sideways looks, until she spotted the quiet girl from earlier, now standing with her head down, adjusting the strap of her worn-out backpack. Without hesitation, Sofia approached, feeling that familiar defensive spark rise within her. She smirked, her voice low but laced with scorn. "Nice bag," she sneered. "Did you dig that out of the trash?" The girl froze, her face pale as she glanced up at Sofia. She didn't speak but took a small, uncertain step back, her fingers gripping her bag tightly. A couple of nearby students looked on, amused, and Sofia felt that old, hollow satisfaction return. Control, she reminded herself. She still had control. Another student nearby laughed and echoed Sofia's taunt, eager to join in, and Sofia felt her pride swell. For a brief moment, she could almost ignore the loneliness gnawing at her. Here, in this small power, she was untouchable. But then, as she looked back at the girl's downcast eyes and the tight grip on her backpack, a flicker of something else appeared. A hesitation, a faint echo of the vulnerability she'd felt on the bench. For a split second, she wondered if she saw a reflection of herself in the girl's frightened gaze, a glimpse of her own hidden fragility. The thought unsettled her, but she quickly shook it off. She lifted her chin, turned on her heel, and strode down the hall, leaving the girl behind. Yet, as she walked away, the satisfaction faded, replaced by a faint, uncomfortable ache she couldn't quite ignore. After class, Sofia strolled down the emptying hallway, her mind drifting through a fog of frustration she couldn't quite shake. She was used to feeling empowered after taunting someone, used to that sense of control. But today, the uneasy ache lingered, gnawing at her thoughts. Just as she rounded the corner, she nearly collided with the quiet girl from earlier. The girl froze, clutching her backpack as if to protect herself. But then, with a steadiness Sofia hadn't seen before, she looked up, her gaze meeting Sofia's directly. "Why?" the girl asked, her voice soft but clear. Sofia blinked, caught off guard by the directness. "Why do you always do this?" Sofia's mouth opened, a retort ready on her tongue, but the words didn't come. For a moment, she found herself staring into the girl's eyes, which held neither anger nor fear, just a calm, quiet strength that made Sofia's usual mask feel suddenly heavy and useless. The girl took a shaky breath and continued, "Do you really think hurting people makes you stronger? Happier?" The hallway seemed to close in around them, the noise of distant laughter and shuffling footsteps fading into silence. Sofia's heart pounded, a strange mix of anger and shame welling up inside her. How dare this girl, someone so timid and insignificant, speak to her this way? But behind the anger, a flicker of something else stirred, a question she'd long buried. She narrowed her eyes, forcing herself to shrug. "What would you know?" she sneered, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "It's not my fault you're too weak to handle a joke." The girl's expression softened, and she shook her head slowly. "I don't think you're mean just because you want to be. I think you're hurting too." She hesitated, searching Sofia's face. "Maybe even more than the people you hurt." Sofia felt her defenses crumbling, but she couldn't let them fall. She scoffed, turning sharply on her heel. "You don't know anything about me," she snapped, walking away quickly. But her heart raced, the girl's words echoing in her mind, refusing to be silenced. Sofia's footsteps echoed down the hallway as she put distance between herself and the quiet girl. But no matter how quickly she walked, the girl's words clung to her thoughts, tightening around her like a net. "I don't think you're mean just because you want to be. I think you're hurting too." She replayed those words over and over, feeling them crack the walls she'd so carefully built. Frustration simmered in her chest, threatening to spill over. Who was she to judge me? Sofia thought, trying to rekindle her anger, to silence the quiet ache the girl's words had stirred. But the anger wouldn't stay. The shame she'd felt, the feeling that she'd been seen, really seen, lingered instead like a dark spot that wouldn't wash away. She turned a corner and spotted the counselor's office down the hall. The door stood open, a warm light spilling out, inviting. She had passed by it countless times before, ignoring it, dismissing it. But now, as she stared at the doorway, an unexpected thought entered her mind. What if I went in? Sofia shook her head, almost laughing at herself. Ridiculous. She didn't need help, and she certainly didn't need anyone prying into her life. Yet a strange pull held her there, a curiosity, a glimmer of something she couldn't name. She took a small step forward, then stopped, her pulse quickening. As she stood there, caught between her defenses and an unfamiliar desire to break free from them, she heard the quiet girl's voice in her mind once more. Maybe even more than the people you hurt. With a deep breath, Sofia turned on her heel and walked away, forcing herself to ignore the counselor's office. But the unease lingered, trailing her like a shadow, growing with every step she took. Sofia's thoughts continued to swirl, unsettled by the girl's words and the nagging ache that had lodged itself in her chest. That night, alone in her room, she stared at the ceiling, the silence pressing down on her. She tried to dismiss the day's events, to push them aside like she always did, but for once, they refused to fade. The next morning, without quite knowing why, Sofia found herself lingering near the counselor's office again. The door was open, and the counselor, a kind-eyed woman in her 40s, sat inside, reviewing papers at her desk. Sophia's heart pounded as she hovered by the doorway, feeling a pull she didn't understand. Just one question, she told herself. Just one moment. Taking a shaky breath, Sophia stepped inside, her usual confidence stripped away. The counselor looked up, surprise flickering across her face, but she quickly masked it with a gentle smile. "Hi, Sophia. Come in and have a seat." Sophia hesitated, but sank into the chair across from the counselor, her gaze fixed on the floor. She didn't know where to start or what she wanted to say. The silence stretched between them until finally the counselor spoke softly. "Is there something on your mind?" Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure how to begin. She'd never let anyone in, never let anyone see beyond her mask. But something about the counselor's calm, patient gaze felt different. She swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you ever feel like you're supposed to be someone else?" The counselor nodded gently. "Sometimes we feel pressure to live up to expectations that don't match who we really are," she said. "It can be very lonely, trying to be someone we're not." A lump rose in Sophia's throat. She wanted to brush it off, to leave, but the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Everyone thinks I have it all. They think I'm strong, but sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough. Like I have to pretend." The counselor listened, her gaze kind and unwavering. "You know, Sophia," she said, "strength doesn't mean hiding our feelings. Sometimes real strength is letting ourselves be seen." Sophia blinked, feeling a tightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She looked down, biting her lip, and nodded slightly. It was the smallest movement, but it felt like the first step toward something she couldn't yet define. The room was silent, the counselor waiting patiently as Sophia wrestled with feelings she'd buried for years. She wanted to speak, to spill everything she'd held back, the pressures, the emptiness, the loneliness, but the words caught in her throat, tangled and heavy. After a moment, the counselor leaned forward slightly, her voice soft. "Sophia, you don't have to say anything if you're not ready, but know that whatever you're feeling, you don't have to carry it alone." Sophia looked away, blinking quickly. She hadn't expected kindness. She was used to people wanting something from her, approval, obedience, perfection, but here in this room, there was only an open space and a person willing to listen. It felt strange, disarming. Her voice came out barely a whisper. "My parents, they want me to be someone I'm not. They talk about their first daughter, the one I replaced. She was perfect. I'm supposed to be perfect too. But no matter what I do, it's never enough." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered, leaving her feeling exposed. The counselor nodded, her gaze filled with understanding. "That must be incredibly hard, Sophia. It sounds like you've been carrying a lot on your own." Sophia's defenses weakened. She bit her lip, swallowing the rising lump in her throat. "I thought, if I was strong enough, no one would know. If people feared me, they wouldn't see how scared I am." Her voice broke, and she quickly looked down, ashamed of the tears gathering in her eyes. The counselor placed a gentle hand on the edge of her desk, an unspoken reassurance. "Sophia, strength doesn't mean hiding. Sometimes strength is letting others in, allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Maybe you don't have to be perfect. Maybe it's okay to just be you." Sophia felt her breath catch as she processed those words. Just be me. It was a thought that had never occurred to her, a strange, almost foreign possibility. She didn't know who just me even was, but a part of her yearned to find out. She gave a small, uncertain nod, feeling a shift within her, as if a door she'd kept locked for years had cracked open just a bit. The next day at school, Sophia felt different, unsteady, as though the ground beneath her had shifted. She walked through the hallways, still keeping her distance, still holding herself in that proud, careful way. But the counselor's words lingered in her mind. Maybe it's okay to just be you. Her gaze fell on the quiet girl she had bullied before. The girl was sitting alone by the window, flipping through a worn-out book, her shoulders hunched as if to make herself as small as possible. For a moment, Sophia felt a pang of guilt, a strange urge to reach out, something she would have brushed off as weakness before. She hesitated, then turned away, hurrying down the hall. Old habits pulled her back toward isolation, to the protective shield she'd carefully built over the years. But as she passed a group of students, she noticed their laughter drop to silence. A few of them shot her nervous glances, stepping aside quickly as if to avoid her gaze. It was the respect she'd always commanded, yet now it felt cold, empty, and strangely isolating. At lunch, Sofia took a seat at the far end of the cafeteria. She scanned the room, her gaze lingering on a group of students laughing together, sharing inside jokes. They were the same students she had once brushed aside as insignificant. Yet here they were, comfortable in their little circle, unaware of her presence, and perhaps, in that moment, happier than she was. Lost in thought, Sofia didn't notice the quiet girl approaching her table until a soft voice broke her reverie. "Do you mind if I sit here?" Sofia blinked, surprised. She glanced up to find the girl standing there, looking uncertain but determined, clutching her lunch tray. For a moment, Sofia's instinct to push her away flared up, but she remembered the counselor's words and felt a strange, hesitant warmth break through her usual reserve. "Sure," Sofia murmured, her voice softer than she intended. The girl sat down, the silence between them thick and awkward at first. Sofia fiddled with the edge of her tray, unsure of what to say, unsure of why she'd allowed this at all. Finally, the girl spoke, her tone careful. "I know that we don't know each other well, and I know you've probably never thought much about it, but you don't have to be alone, you know." Sofia felt a tightness in her chest. She wanted to brush the girl off, to say something sharp and dismissive, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she managed a quiet, uncertain, "Thanks." For the first time, she didn't feel the urge to put up a wall. She let the silence settle, feeling a strange calm as they shared the table, two unlikely companions who, in that moment, needed each other more than either realized. In the following days, Sofia found herself thinking less about control and more about the kindness she had begun to notice around her. It was subtle. A helping hand, a quiet smile, a supportive glance. Little gestures she'd once ignored now seemed to carry a weight, a warmth she hadn't realized was missing from her life. She hadn't been looking for these things, yet somehow they found her. One morning, as she walked through the hallway, Sofia noticed a few students gathered in a corner. One of the boys in the group, small and often picked on, was the target of quiet snickers and mocking smiles. His face flushed as he stared at his shoes, clutching a worn notebook close to his chest. Sofia paused, her instinct telling her to move along. It wasn't her problem. Not anymore. But something held her in place. She saw herself in the boy's downcast eyes, the way he held himself, as if bracing for the impact of words that would cut deeper than anyone else could see. The feeling was unsettling yet strangely familiar. Against every instinct, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Hey," she said, her voice firm but lacking its usual edge. The students looked up, surprise flashing in their eyes. "Is there a problem here?" One of them opened his mouth to reply but quickly shut it, exchanging glances with the others. Sofia's presence was enough to send them off, muttering to themselves as they backed away. The boy looked up at her, his eyes wide, a flicker of gratitude and disbelief crossing his face. Sofia forced herself to hold his gaze, managing a small, almost hesitant nod before turning away. She felt the weight of her actions, the shift in her own resolve. She hadn't stepped in to exert power, to control, or to intimidate. This time, she'd acted because it felt right. As she walked down the hall, the familiar emptiness that usually followed these encounters was gone. In its place was a faint warmth, a tiny spark of something new. The rest of the day passed quietly, but the strange warmth from the hallway lingered in Sofia's mind. She couldn't quite name the feeling, but it was enough to make her feel lighter, as if the walls she'd spent so long building were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. After school, Sofia headed to her locker, gathering her books in silence. She was about to close it when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with a group of students she once considered her friends, the popular, confident, untouchable crowd that she'd once belonged to. They looked at her with raised eyebrows, exchanging knowing smirks. "Hey, Sofia," one of them sneered, crossing her arms. "We saw you playing hero in the hallway earlier. What's with the change? You going soft on us?" Another laughed, nudging her. "Yeah, maybe she's feeling sorry for the little guys now. Pretty soon, she'll be sitting with them at lunch." Their laughter echoed down the hall, sharp and mocking. Sofia's stomach twisted. For years, she had used these friends as shields, convincing herself that belonging to this circle was the only way to keep herself from feeling alone, from feeling vulnerable. But now, their words felt hollow, and the pride she once felt around them seemed shallow and meaningless. Summoning a strength she hadn't known she possessed, Sofia met their gazes, her voice steady. "Maybe I am changing," she said softly, her words carrying a weight they couldn't mock. "Maybe it's time I stop caring what you all think." Their laughter faltered, replaced by looks of surprise and confusion. They hadn't expected this. They didn't know what to do with the version of Sofia standing before them now. One of the girls rolled her eyes, scoffing, "Whatever. Let's go. Looks like our Sofia isn't who we thought she was." As they walked away, Sofia felt an odd, liberating calm. The weight of their expectations lifted, and with it, the need to wear the mask she'd hidden behind for so long. She closed her locker slowly, her heart racing, realizing that for the first time, she'd chosen to stand up not for power, not for control, but for herself. For the first time, she'd chosen to be Sofia. Sofia left school feeling lighter than she had in years. The walk home felt strangely refreshing, as if the world around her had opened up, colors brighter, the air clearer. She felt free from the chains of others' expectations, free from the constant need to shield herself behind a wall of scorn and indifference. The next morning, as she entered the cafeteria, Sofia spotted the quiet girl, the one who had once been her target but had somehow become her ally. The girl sat alone at a corner table, focused on a book, her posture tense as if trying to make herself invisible. Taking a deep breath, Sofia walked over. She could feel the eyes of others in the cafeteria on her, the lingering shock of her recent changes still fresh among her classmates. But today, she didn't care. When she reached the table, she set her tray down and looked at the girl with a soft, genuine smile. "Is this seat taken?" The girl looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, she seemed unsure, as if she expected Sofia to take it back, to turn and walk away with a smirk. But Sofia held her gaze, a quiet kindness in her expression that was unmistakable. "No," the girl finally replied, a tentative smile forming. "It's not taken." They sat in comfortable silence at first, the occasional awkward glance exchanged between them. Slowly, their small talk began to unfold. They spoke about their classes, favorite books, the little things that made them laugh. It was simple, gentle, and real, unlike any interaction Sofia had had in years. Across the room, a few students watched them, whispering to each other. Sofia noticed, but the usual irritation and defensiveness didn't rise within her. Instead, she felt proud. She was no longer hiding behind her mask or letting herself be controlled by the fear of others' opinions. In that quiet corner of the cafeteria, Sofia began to understand that friendship didn't come from power or intimidation. It came from trust, from kindness, and from the courage to let herself be vulnerable. And for the first time, she felt truly seen, not as the image she had crafted, but as the person she was slowly discovering beneath it all. Over the next few weeks, Sofia continued to let down her walls, bit by bit. Her transformation was subtle but unmistakable. She no longer wielded power over others through sharp words or cold stares. Instead, she listened, she smiled, and sometimes even laughed, small, real laughs she hadn't known herself capable of. But one afternoon, as she walked down the hallway, she spotted a boy from her class being cornered by a group of students she recognized all too well, her former friends. They crowded him, snickering, blocking his path, their voices low but taunting. The boy looked small and nervous, clutching his notebook to his chest, his face red with embarrassment. Sofia hesitated, the memories of her own past actions surfacing uncomfortably. She knew this game. She'd played it herself more times than she wanted to admit. But now, standing there, seeing it unfold in front of her, she felt a pang of guilt, as if watching a shadow of her former self. Taking a deep breath, Sofia squared her shoulders and stepped forward. "Hey!" Her voice was steady, clear. The group turned, their smirks faltering as they recognized her. "What's going on here?" One of them shrugged, feigning innocence. "Just talking to him, Sofia. It's all in good fun." But Sofia didn't buy it, and neither did the boy, who was visibly shaking. She looked at each of them, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You know, that's not what it looks like from here. Maybe you should just leave him alone." There was a beat of silence. They exchanged uncertain glances, confused by her sudden role as protector rather than instigator. Finally, they shrugged, rolling their eyes as they backed off, muttering under their breath as they walked away. Sophia turned to the boy, offering a gentle nod. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer now. The boy looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Yeah, thanks." He managed a small smile, then scurried off, clutching his notebook as if it were a lifeline. As Sophia watched him go, a sense of peace settled over her. This time, she hadn't acted out of pride or fear, but out of genuine empathy. She felt lighter, as if she'd shed an old layer of herself, a weight she'd been carrying far too long. For the first time, Sophia realized she'd found something more powerful than control. She'd found compassion. And it filled her in a way that pride and power never could. As the weeks went on, Sophia noticed how her relationships with others were slowly changing. Students she once dismissed now nodded at her in the hallways, some even offering shy smiles or waves. The quiet girl who'd first reached out to her, now her friend, often sat with her at lunch, and they spent their time talking about everything and nothing, in that easy way only real friends could. One evening, Sophia returned home feeling lighter than ever. But as she entered the quiet house, her mood shifted. The weight of her parents' expectations was still there, lingering in the air like a heavy mist. Dinner was a formal affair, with her parents barely glancing up from their own conversations, until finally, her mother set down her fork and looked at her intently. "So, Sophia," her mother began, "we heard from one of your teachers that you've been associating with some different types of students lately." Her voice was polite, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Sophia's heart raced, but she held her ground, choosing her words carefully. "I've made some new friends. They're good people." Her father glanced at her, frowning. "Just remember, Sophia, we didn't raise you to settle for mediocrity. You should be focusing on your grades, your future, not distractions." His words were a cold reminder of the expectations that had shaped her life. But for the first time, Sophia didn't feel the usual pull to shrink, to hide behind a mask of obedience. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage she'd been building these past few weeks. "I'm trying to find who I am," she said softly but firmly. "Not just who you want me to be." The silence that followed was thick, her parents exchanging uncertain glances. Her mother opened her mouth to respond, but Sophia spoke first, her voice steadier than she expected. "I know you want what's best for me, but I need to figure out what that is for myself." Her parents looked at her, startled, perhaps for the first time seeing her as someone more than just their perfect child. Sophia felt a wave of relief, a quiet strength blooming within her. She didn't know where this journey would lead, but she knew, finally, that it was hers to walk, and that knowledge was enough. The next day at school, Sophia walked through the hallways with a quiet confidence, feeling lighter and freer than she had in years. She no longer feared the whispers or sidelong glances. They no longer held the power they once did. She had started to understand that real strength wasn't about control, but about honesty and kindness, both to others and to herself. When she entered the cafeteria, she was greeted by a few familiar faces, students who, not long ago, she would have ignored. The quiet girl waved her over with a warm smile, and Sophia joined her at the table. They sat with a small group of students who chatted comfortably, including the boy she'd stood up for in the hallway. The boy looked up, a hesitant smile spreading across his face. "Hey, Sophia. Thanks again for, before." Sophia gave him a reassuring nod. "You're welcome. No one deserves to feel small like that." As they ate together, Sophia found herself opening up in ways she never thought she could. She shared pieces of her life, her struggles, her confusion over who she was and who she wanted to be. And to her surprise, her new friends shared their own insecurities and challenges, each story bringing them closer. For the first time, she felt part of something real, something unbreakable. It was a bond built not on fear or status, but on understanding, acceptance, and compassion. And with every laugh, every honest word, Sophia felt the armor she'd worn for so long fall away, piece by piece. Later, as she left the cafeteria, Sophia felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a warmth and belonging that filled the empty places within her. She had spent so much of her life seeking power, but now, surrounded by genuine friends, she realized that what she had truly needed all along was connection. For the first time, Sofia knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. In the days that followed, Sofia found herself drawn to something she'd once avoided, the idea of giving back. She had spent years building walls to keep others out, but now she felt a quiet, steady pull to help those around her, especially the students who might feel as lost and alone as she once had. One afternoon, Sofia noticed a poster on the school's bulletin board announcing a new peer support program aimed at creating a safe space for students facing bullying and isolation. A wave of uncertainty washed over her. She knew better than anyone what it felt like to be isolated, but she was also painfully aware of her own past. Could she, of all people, help others find the acceptance she had once denied them? After a moment of hesitation, she took a deep breath and found herself signing up. The counselor, who managed the program, greeted her warmly at the first meeting, as if she knew that this step had been no small feat for Sofia. "Welcome," the counselor said, her smile reassuring. "Your perspective could be incredibly valuable here." The first session was both humbling and eye-opening. Sofia listened to students share stories of hurt and fear, recounting experiences that were hauntingly familiar. She felt a mix of empathy and regret as she heard echoes of her own past cruelty in their words, realizing fully for the first time the pain she had caused. But as the sessions went on, something shifted within her. Slowly, she began to speak up, offering insights and encouragement, sharing the hard lessons she'd learned on her journey to self-acceptance. She didn't have all the answers, but she had her experience, and she used it to help others find the courage to open up. Each week, she watched as more students joined, their guarded expressions softening as they found support among each other. And through it all, Sofia discovered a sense of purpose she had never known, a way to turn her past mistakes into something meaningful, something healing. By helping others, she was, in turn, healing herself. For every story she listened to, every piece of advice she offered, Sofia felt a part of her old self, the one she no longer needed, slip away, leaving behind only strength and compassion. One quiet afternoon, as the support group meeting ended, Sofia lingered, feeling a sense of peace settle within her. She stayed behind to help the counselor organize the room, stacking chairs and gathering papers. When the last chair was in place, she paused, looking around the empty room, a faint smile on her face. The counselor noticed and stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You've come a long way, Sofia." Sofia looked down, a small but genuine smile playing on her lips. I finally feel like I'm becoming someone I can respect," she said softly. "For so long, I thought strength meant shutting people out. Now I know it's about letting them in." The counselor nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "It's true. Real strength is in kindness, in connection. You've shown that to everyone here." As Sofia left the school that day, she realized that for the first time she felt whole. Her heart was lighter, no longer burdened by resentment or anger. She had made peace with her past, and in doing so, she'd found herself. Walking down the familiar hallways, Sofia greeted classmates she'd once ignored, exchanging small, friendly smiles and waves. She was no longer hiding, no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. And as she stepped outside, the late afternoon sun warming her face, she understood something she hadn't before. Her journey wasn't about erasing who she'd been. It was about learning from it, about transforming it into something better. She had taken her scars, her mistakes, and turned them into something healing and honest. Looking out over the school grounds, Sofia felt a quiet joy rise within her. She was no longer the girl behind the perfect mask. She was simply Sofia, a girl who had faced her darkness, embraced her light, and learned to let both guide her forward. And as she walked home, she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey, one built on compassion, connection, and the courage to be herself.